Okay, now we're going to focus on Section A, Part 2. This is called the intake. This is a very, very crucial part of any time we're doing a wheelchair for anybody. What's important is that we understand the patient's background, who their insurance is, we get all their information, and the idea here is a few parts that are important, and we want to make sure that we are going out to our patient. We know what we're walking into. We know who their funding source is. We know what the patient's eligible for. We know who to communicate with. We know who their doctor is. We know who their therapist is. We know they didn't get a wheelchair 3 weeks ago, and now we're trying to give them a new chair, and they're not going to qualify for it. So what's very important is that when we get an intake is we get all the specific information. We know what sort of request we're looking for. We know what the patient's insurance is. Sometimes the patient says, oh, I have Medicare, and then we look it up online. We find out that it's a managed Medicare, and they don't really qualify for X, Y, and Z. Sometimes we say, oh, this is the patient, not sure who to communicate with. The patient's daughter lives in Florida somewhere. We don't know how to get things done. We're not sure who the doctor is going to be. We want to make sure that we're going to go out to an assessment. We're going to get this equipment provided for. So what's important for us to know is the patient's information, their date of birth, their address, good contact number. If there's a caregiver that helps them out with all this information, who's that, who's their doctor, who's their therapist. Now, part of why we want to know this is we want to make sure we want to check their DME history. Because what happened was there's a rule called the 5-year same and similar. What that means is durable medical equipment. By definition, durable, it should have a 5-year lifespan. So what that means is that if a patient received a wheelchair, any sort of wheelchair, if that chair breaks down under 5 years, the insurance company is going to say your patient is not eligible to get a new one because they have a chair that should have lasted them 5 years. What's important to note is that a patient may receive the chair less than 5 years ago, but may still be eligible for a new chair because the idea of same and similar means they cannot get a replacement of the exact same equipment. If a patient's equipment they received, if you have a patient, for example, who was discharged from a nursing home and they got a manual wheelchair and they're unable to self-propel it, that wheelchair is not appropriate for them. If the equipment that they have is not medically appropriate, it was never appropriate, or there's been a change in condition, the patient received the manual chair 2 years ago, has had a stroke since then, and now they can't propel it. They don't have to wait 5 years because they're not going to get the exact same equipment. That patient can always get upgraded to a motorized wheelchair, upgraded to an ultra lightweight wheelchair, upgraded to a tilt and space. What's important to note is the same and sim 5-year system is for the exact same equipment. A patient can have a change in condition that the equipment that they have is no longer medically appropriate. They don't have to wait 5 years for a new chair. But what we need to know is what the patient has on file because there's a catch to the same sim. The catch is that if a patient receives a motorized wheelchair, because we said 2 years ago the patient was unable to self-propel a manual wheelchair, according to Medicare, they're out of the manual wheelchair world. That patient is always going to be a motorized wheelchair user. Now, when it comes to motorized wheelchairs, also, the patient may have a standard motorized wheelchair, but that may not be good enough for them because now they're unable to weight shift. They have increased spasticities. They have catheter changes. Whatever the reason is, we'll get into later as to why a patient would benefit and qualify for powered seating, or the patient's in a group 2 chair, they're group 3, depending on what sort of chair they're in. If it's not medically appropriate, we can always upgrade them less than 5 years from when they received their initial chair. Again, we have to know what they have because we cannot downgrade them. We can always upgrade above 5 years. Downgrading never works. Even after 5 years, we cannot downgrade a patient. You don't have to know so much of this, but it's just important that when we get a referral and you have a therapist reaches out to you, what are we looking for? Let's get the patient's information first. We need to have the patient's demographics. We need the patient's insurance because this information, if we don't have it at the get-go, there's nothing worse than going out, meeting with a patient, making recommendations, talking them through why this equipment is going to be fantastic for them, and then calling them up and saying, sorry, you don't qualify for it. Because now you made yourself look bad, your therapist looks bad, your doctor looks bad, everybody's upset that the patient's not getting what they think they need because either the insurance is not going to qualify them for it for whatever reason. They may have received some different company a few years before that really messed up their DME history. We don't know, but what's important on our end is to know what the patient's insurance is, what they're eligible for prior to walking in. So this way, when we recommend equipment, we're confident that we're telling our patient about items that they can receive.